Hello and welcome back to Perspectives, bringing you our daily dose of news and views we hope are relevant to you. Today, governments are beginning to wake up. In the US, Donald Trump announces he's going to target the mainstream media, big tech and academia to uncover misinformation, throttling and shadow banning of all sorts of websites and social media over the last few years. So what will this mean for the Sikh community? In the UK, are we seeing genuine action at last from the UK government over Jaggi? And in Australia, their government wades in on transnational repression at last. But in the meantime, India is clearly under pressure from the global siege as they cancel consular visits across Canada in the wake of Hindutva violence. And Indian media fights a rearguard action in a desperate bid to divert attention away from what Modi's government have been up to. Has Narendra Modi realised he just may have bitten off more than he can chew? Well, all this and more in today's show. And joining me as always, though, for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our amazing viewers out there. We love your comments. Keep them coming.
Indeed we do. And James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And of course we will be taking a look at loads of your great comments at the end of the show and lots of wonderfully critical comments to really get our teeth sunk into as well. So join us at the end of the show for that as well. So James, let's get things underway. What are you going to start us off with this morning?
India seems to have taken the hint that they are not wanted out in the community. They can do their job just as well from the confines of the consul buildings. Now, a lot of the what they call their consul camps that are taking place out in the communities have been either permanently cancelled or put on hold. Depending on which release you look at, there are some that are saying that they have cancelled all of the events across Canada and others that saying they're just cancelling ones across Ontario. Regardless, of course, we know that there has been violence that has broken out. And this is very interesting that the India government has weighed in, claiming that it's because Canada cannot provide security, even at a minimum level, to protect the consul diplomats when they're out in the communities. So it's very telling that once again they are out there spinning a narrative that it was all the Sikh community and that they are innocent, that they are the ones being attacked, they are the ones that are unsafe, and they've even gone on to say that the Sikh community was beating women and children outside of the Hindu temples and mandir, which is just ridiculous. That is not what happened. It is a total, not only twisting of the facts, but manipulation and out lies about what was going on. So, of course, we have to look at where they are in terms of British Columbia as well as Ontario for these consular visits. And they are at this time, as I said, depending on which news agency you're looking at, some claim that they have cancelled all of them, while others claim that, or other statements say they are just cancelling Ontario. So we'll have to wait and see. But at the same time, this is very much an ongoing story that's creating a lot of complex issues within the community. Now, it's also very important to bring up here that with the cancellations over the consular visits and the violence that broke out, it's important to keep in mind that it is not a Hindu versus Sikh battle. It is actually a lot being brought in by the India government, placing people in there to agitate and to spark different acts of violence and commotion. Now, the radicalized Hindutva has been working with the India government, which we've known for many years. And this is not something new. This is something that they have been doing. However, it seems that there has been an influx of violence that's happening not only in Canada, but also in India and other parts of the world. We know of foiled assassination plots in the US. We know that there are possibly deaths in the UK that have been linked to the India government or operatives that are acting at the behest of the India government. And this is just really showing that they are actually paying attention, that they are not wanted out in the communities when they, as I said at the beginning, can be doing their jobs just fine from the council buildings. They are not located that far from a lot of the gurdwaras or temples where they've been holding these events, and therefore it makes no sense other than the fact that the India government and the consulate is trying to track or to keep tabs on what's going on in the community by being in these places of worship. So once again, this is just something that a lot of the Hindu and the Sikh community are coming together in terms of speaking out, saying we don't want the violence in our communities. We want to live harmoniously. We want to be able to respect each other's space, our different places of worship, and our different diasporas within the Canadian community. Now, the Indian diaspora as a whole actually makes up the largest immigration group within Canadian population. So it's important to keep in mind how much power, but also how much contribution they bring with them to the Canadian society. And I'm not talking about financially, I'm talking about as a part of our communities, building communities, strong communities, helping to keep communities safe. And this was really blown out by what happened last weekend. And the Indian news is just going on and on about trying to push that narrative of the violence against Hindus when it was actually quite the opposite. And the Hindutva people who had been placed, we suspect, and others suspect, that they were placed by either the India government or India government agencies to spill out the hatred, to make the whole community, not only Canadian community, but around the world, to look at Canada in a negative light, and therefore pushing Prime Minister Narendra Modi's narrative that it is Canada that's the problem right now and not them. So we are seeing, as I said, just an ongoing battle. But again, I think that the truth is starting to weigh out within the Canadian media. If you looked at social media over the last week, you would notice a very high imbalance. The India government and the India media were really pushing their narrative, and I would say 5 out of 6 stories were actually either false or just statements by the India government. And even in Parliament, when Justin Trudeau addressed Parliament this week and said that this violence is not acceptable in Canadian communities, he was also very quick to note and to state publicly, it is not the Sikh community that's creating the violence. It is not the Hindu community creating the violence. It is something beyond that. And with his assertion there, we can read between the lines that even the Canadian government is recognizing that there's an Hindu group of people that are trying to instigate and inflame the Canadian public and the international community to take away from what they're doing, Angus.
This is really interesting, and there's a lot of noise in across the media about all this whole story about this violence and this specific story, India saying, right, we will no longer use the mandirs for consular business. Well, I mean, first of all, the question was always raised, well, why in the first place, as a secular nation, are you using places of worship, particularly Hindu places of worship, to undertake government services? That in itself sort of raised all sorts of questions. Of course, we know the answers to all this. And now India is sort of raising the sort of the stakes, saying, oh, well, we're not going to do this anymore because of this violence that's been rained down upon us as a nation. Okay, all well and good, and we can pick apart this sort of story in great detail. But in reality, I think this is an awful lot of noise. We need to start looking at the bigger picture. What actually is going on here? Now, as we've said on many occasions, all this is a bit of a diversion. It's a bit of a diversionary tactic to try and drive attention away from actually what they've really been doing, which is the transnational repression, and the fact that that transnational repression behaviour can be sourced all the way back up to the highest levels of the Indian government, and most likely to Narendra Modi himself. Again, all well and good. And as you rightly say in that, as you pointed to in that article, James, this isn't a Hindus versus Sikhs situation. This, in reality, is an existential crisis for India. This is actually a much, much bigger story and a much bigger game at play here. we often talk about the Brahmin dominance of India. This Brahmin dominance has, ever since 1947, and arguably before then, or in fact, actually it was before then, it was actually since the very first guru. This Brahmin dominance of the subcontinent has always been under threat from the Sikh community, because the only community who has the desire, the will, the philosophical motivation, and indeed the capability, the physical capability, to be a genuine threat to Brahmanical control of India, it is of course the Sikh community. They know this, both sides know this, so this is why the Brahmins have since forevermore been trying to destroy the Sikh community, because they fear the Sikh community. So all this now going on in Canada is, once again, this is spilling over. This is all symptomatic of this battle, this literal existential battle between the Brahmins and the Sikhs. Now let's put this into context. India, as it stands, is a country of 1.4 billion people. The Punjab has a Sikh population of around 30 million people. 30 million. And according to Narendra Modi, the Khalistan campaign, the Khalistan movement, is a fringe movement of terrorists, and therefore by their very own definition is a tiny, tiny number of people. That's according to India. So why? Why then, you have to ask, is India destroying its national reputation, destroying its whole credibility on the world stage? Why is it literally risking its nation's future to chase after this tiny number of Khalistani campaigners that it labels as terrorists? Again, it all points, this actually is, and we from our side and the Sikh community itself have actually got to look at themselves and actually pat yourselves on the back, because this all points to the very flattering conclusion that the Indian Brahmins are terrified. They realise that the Khalistan movement isn't just a fringe movement of a small number of people. They realise it is infiltrated the whole Sikh ethos. It is actually fundamental to the whole Sikh community. In other words, the whole Sikh community are essentially behind this whole concept. Not every Sikh, mind, but most of them. This is why they will never have a referendum in the Punjab, because they know what the result will be. This is why they are fighting absolutely doggedly this obsessive agenda, as I keep calling it, this obsessive agenda to oppress the Khalistan movement. Again, because they realise it's not just gaining momentum, that once it does build and build, as it is doing, it has the potential not just to bring down the Indian government and Brahmanical control, but to actually break up India. This is where we're going. So when we talk about this noise, these stories here, James, that we're talking about, all these are symptomatic. This is the wisps of smoke that I referred to the other day. These are the wisps of smoke coming from a very, very hot central furnace. And that central furnace is a fire burning within the Khalistan movement. It is massive, it is volcanic, it is seismic in scale. India knows this. This is why India are absolutely terrified, because they know that the Khalistan movement is growing and it is coming for the Brahmanical control of India. And with that, they know that it will potentially break up India, that Khalistan is coming and that all the other dominoes will fall. So, James, I think this really is, I don't want to blow things out of proportion, but I think realistically is that these stories all point to one very central piece of momentum, and that momentum is that India is terrified because they know they are losing this massive battle, this literal existential battle for not just control, but for the very existence of India as a country. That's what it boils down to, James.
Absolutely, Angus. And as I said, they are utilizing this whole weeks of events to try and divert attention from themselves and the transnational repression and the foreign interference that they've been caught doing, dead to rights they've been caught. And to take this a step further, my second story, Angus, I've actually kind of got a bit of an overlap, but at the same time, very much on the same point. And I wanted to take you back. The CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, re-released a documentary. This series is called The Fifth Estate, and this has been going for about 50 years in Canada. It's a very well-respected news magazine television series. They had last year, or earlier this year, an episode called Contract to Kill. And I've got a few minute segment here. It's actually about a 5-minute segment, but it's very interesting that the parts that I picked out here shows that there has been a mistrust and manipulation and false information from India to Canada going back to the 1980s. And it also helps to explain a bit more about what the problem is today in terms of what the India government has done to the Sikhs going back to the 80s, but also as far back as 1947. So I'm just going to pull that up and let the viewers see this, Angus, because I think it brings up some very particular points that are very telling. And
who supports the creation of an independent Sikh country called Khalistan. India considers the Khalistan movement a security threat. Hardeep Singh Nijjar worked tirelessly from Surrey to accomplish that. For most Canadians, it may come as a shock to learn there's an active independence movement in Canada for another country on the other side of the world. For Canadian Sikhs and Hindus, it is in some ways the legacy of the partition of India by the British in 1947. Then the largest chunk of land became the Republic of India. The smaller part became the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Despite having ruled Punjab for over half a century before colonization, the Sikhs got left. Dan Stanton was a senior Canadian intelligence officer for 30 years. During that time, he investigated extremism, including within the Sikh community. He said it was an issue in Canada in the 1980s, but has long since died out. Stanton retired from CSIS 4 years ago.
Who is Hardeep Singh Nijjar?
He was a Canadian. He was an activist, and he did promote the idea of Khalistan. I have my doubts that he was a terrorist. The Indian government has a proven track record of, in many ways, wanting to denigrate the Sikh community in Canada.
What's the truth about Sikh extremism? There's new evidence that the Indian government has embarked on a campaign to give Sikhs a bad name.
There are even some conservative MPs who are beginning to wonder if Ottawa is being misled by New Delhi.
And so they'll often create this illusion that there's all these Sikh terrorists in Canada going around. So I'm skeptical about the assertions that he was a terrorist.
We asked the Indian High Commission in Ottawa to let us know what the evidence is that Nijjar was a terrorist, but they never responded to us. This is video that the mainstream Indian media use in their reporting about Nijjar, identifying him as the person shooting the firearms here, claiming he ran a terrorist training camp in BC. But the person in this video seems to bear no resemblance to Nijjar. So we investigated. People in Surrey who should know have confirmed the man in this video is not Hardeep Singh Nijjar. In fact, through friends and family, we were able to confirm his identity. But for his safety, we're not releasing his name.
Where's the line between free speech and fomenting dissent?
People have to actually do things to support terrorism. It could be, providing money, funds, things like that. And so it's like a checklist. And if the individual isn't going through that checklist, so to speak, they remain an activist.
One method the Indian government uses to conduct its propaganda campaign inside this country is this. It distributes a mountain of Indian newspapers, free and unsolicited, to a number of Sikh businesses. Then there are other government publications like this one, which states that Sikhs in Vancouver are receiving combat training at the YMCA. That's something that came as a complete surprise to the Y.
Another Canadian accused of terrorism by the Indian government is Gurpatwant Singh Pannu.
We are going to balkanize India!
This was a non-binding referendum organized by Pannu in Surrey, BC in September 2023 He's a dual Canadian and American citizen, known widely for two things: holding referendums around the world so local Sikh communities can vote on whether to carve out an independent country from a part of India, which they want to call Khalistan. He also posts videos online, making inflammatory statements seemingly designed to enrage the Indian government.
And with Guru's blessings, and challenging Indian Prime Minister, Hindu terrorist Modi.
And enrage India's government he has.
So as you can see, this is something that is not new. It actually, with the clips there going back to the 80s, and you gotta love the style and the haircuts back then. But it just shows that India has been going on like this for decades, and they have been caught now. But again, they are creating other issues in our communities that are just ridiculously, just flagrant acts of inciting violence and hatred and division among the Canadian diasporas. Now, the recent diplomatic tensions between India and Canada, particularly regarding the alleged involvement of Indian agents in the killing of Sikh activists here, have brought to light complex issues surrounding the relationship between the Indian government, the Hindu nationalist movement known as Hindutva, and the Sikh diaspora. It's important again to note that not all Hindus or Indians support Hindutva, and many condemn its extremist ideology and actions. However, as I stated earlier, the rise of Hindutva has coincided with the increased tensions between Hindutva radicals and Sikhs, particularly in India. Some Sikh activists and international human rights organizations have accused the India government of using Hindutva to target and suppress Sikh dissent, both within India and in the diaspora. Some Indian politicians and media outlets have accused Sikh activists in Canada of supporting terrorism and separatism and have called for stricter measures to be taken against them. They've even gone further to use false media reports and narratives to create a false image of Canada and the Canadian leaders as creating a safe haven for extremists and terrorists, which is just clearly false. It's important to approach the issue with nuance and avoid generalizations. Not all Hindus support Hindutva. However, the increasing polarization and extremism by Hindutva radicals around the world is placing all Indians in an unfair light from Westerners who don't understand the difference. And that's really important, that people do not understand the difference when it comes to minorities, because they just lump them all together and they don't take the time to learn about different cultures as much as they should. And that's where I really see the Sikh community in Vancouver, in Surrey, and across Canada pushing to build that bridge with the main communities of all different religious backgrounds. And that includes major parades that happen every year and festivals. And, they really try to reach out to the community, and they're successful at it. They have over 500,000 people show up to different parades and events in Surrey alone. And that is just amazing when you consider the other events that are happening throughout the summer. To draw that number of people is really a respectful thing. Both India and Canada have a responsibility to protect the rights of all of their citizens, regardless of religion or ethnicity, while protecting their human rights and freedoms. This is where India has been failing, and instead of trying to address their shortcomings, excuse me, they try to create international situations which make it seem as though anyone speaking out against them is harboring and supporting terrorists. And that's what they're doing in Canada, trying to make it seem like we are as well, but it's not true. Hindutva radicals being encouraged by India to create further divides between all communities, especially the Canadian Hindu and Sikh diasporas. There's also, this is also helping to draw the news cycle around the world away from the fact that members of the Indian government have been caught involved in foreign interference and transnational repression and spreading misinformation, as we've already spoke about, Angus. So it really is an issue that the India government is just utilizing the opportunity, and I think that they've created the opportunity to really disparage the communities, both the Hindu and the Sikh communities here in Canada.
Yeah, we often talk about this propaganda war, and I think in reality, what's becoming very evident is that India are losing this war, despite having this massive, huge army of Hindutva activists online, despite having a massive financial war chest. As we know, it's over $400 million a year that they pour into this pro-Modi, anti-Sikh propaganda that's essentially bankrolled by the RSS. India is losing the PR battle because, as we're seeing right across Western media now, I mean, there's the in the old days, in simple terms, it was just the human rights groups and the Sikh community who were trying to get their voices heard, saying, look, and pointing the finger at India and saying, look what India are up to, this is what they're doing. But of course, the mainstream media were too busy with other things to talk about. And most people in the West were just not interested, to be blunt about it, because it didn't affect them directly. Suddenly now, because of what India have been up to, the transnational repression, the violence that is now being seen on, for example, Canada's streets, with the Hindutva mobs, armed mobs, taking to Canada's street and threatening to kill Canadian citizens. All this means is that India is becoming increasingly desperate because essentially they've been caught out with transnational repression, that both the Canadian and the US governments have now publicly pointed the finger at India. Is that the mainstream media and normal people in the streets, not normally connected to the Sikh community, are now suddenly hearing about India and what they've been up to. And again, this as I keep referring to it, this sort of benign fake illusion of their view of what India represents has suddenly been shattered because they're now reading in the mainstream media, hearing it on the mainstream news or on the radio or on the mainstream online news outlets. They're seeing these stories about Hindutva mobs being armed in the streets. They're hearing about Canadian citizens and US citizens being assassinated on their own soil by the Indian government. This is mainstream news, and people are now hearing this, and people are starting to question, well, hang on a second, why is India doing this? What is it up to? Meanwhile, the Sikh community have been seen out there working extremely hard to improve their image and ensure that their image amongst their local communities and indeed the national communities is a very positive image, despite the fact that they're standing out there, even in protest, they're standing there smiling peacefully, waving their colourful yellow flags of Khalistan, and people are walking past saying, oh, these people are clearly campaigning about something, but they're doing it peacefully, they're doing it happily. There's no violence, there's no negativity, there's no intimidation or harassment going on. It's just a very peaceful gathering of Khalistani people. And that, combined with events like Langar and Langar Week that we had recently, is always setting out a very positive image of the Sikh community. So all you need to do then is, if you're the average Westerner, non-Sikh Westerner, and you weigh up what you're seeing in the news about the negative news about India compared to the positive news about the Sikh community and the Khalistan movement, of course, it's very easy to then draw your own conclusions. And this is why, James, I'm saying, and I continue to say, that India is losing this PR battle despite the massive resources behind it. They're fighting it in completely the wrong way. It's actually it's increasing signs of desperation that India are just pouring more and more desperate measures, which usually involve violence and pouring people out onto the streets in a negative way. And all that is doing is exacerbating their bad image. And meanwhile, all the Khalistan movement, all the Sikh community need to do is just carry on what they're doing. Carry on peacefully getting visible out in the streets with the Khalistan flags, always smiling, always being positive, and always remaining peaceful, never being provoked. That's the most important thing. Don't fall into that Hindutva trap. Never being provoked, just campaigning peacefully, democratically. Democracy, as we say, James, always wins in the end. Truth will prevail, democracy will prevail, and all the Sikh community need to do, James, is just carry on what they're doing, and they will win this battle.
Absolutely, Angus, and thank you to the CBC for that clip there. And I encourage you to watch the whole episode. It's very enlightening. It's full of all kinds of information, including the fact that with all likelihood, Niger was not the first Canadian killed by the India government or agents acting thereof. And and the link is there on the video, so feel free to check that out. And also, before I hand over the stories for you, Angus, I just want to make a special shout out to all of the Canadian Sikhs who battled in the world wars and were a part of the Canadian military as we celebrate Remembrance Day today. And remember all of those who have given on behalf of Canada, our security, and making the world a better place. So happy Remembrance Day to all.
Absolutely, and very, very wise words, which I completely endorse, and well done to the Sikh community, and commemorations to all the Sikhs, thousands of Sikhs who have fought for the Allies during the Second World War, and of course all the other wars, the Great War as well. So Remembrance Day is a very poignant day that we remember all soldiers from all backgrounds. So, okay, let's move on now, and I'm going to take a look at some various high-level governmental stories from across particularly the Western nations and across the Five Eyes nations. And Elon Musk yesterday posted up a fascinating video of Donald Trump, and I believe this is genuine. I've tried to corroborate it, and I cannot find anything that can deny that this is actually true. And I'm going to show you a few clips from this video. Donald Trump released a very powerful announcement over the weekend. I'll play you a few clips for you just now. Take a listen to this.
If we don't have free speech, then we just don't have a free country. It's as simple as that. If this most fundamental right is allowed to perish, then the rest of our rights and liberties will topple, just like dominoes, one by one. They'll go down. That's why today I'm announcing my plan to shatter the left-wing censorship regime and to reclaim the right to free speech for all Americans. And reclaim is a very important word in this case because they've taken it away. In recent weeks, bombshell reports have confirmed that a sinister group of deep state bureaucrats, Silicon Valley tyrants, left-wing activists, and depraved corporate news media have been conspiring to manipulate and silence the American people. They have collaborated to suppress vital information on everything from elections to public health. The censorship cartel must be dismantled and destroyed, and it must happen immediately. And here's my plan. To assist in these efforts, I am urging House Republicans to immediately send preservation letters, and we have to do this right now, to the Biden administration, the Biden campaign, and every Silicon Valley tech giant, ordering them not to destroy evidence of censorship. If any U.S. university is discovered to have engaged in censorship activities or election interferences in the past, such as flagging social media content for removal of blacklisting, those universities should lose federal research dollars and federal student loan support for a period of 5 years and maybe more. Furthermore, when users of big online platforms have their content or accounts removed, throttled, shadow banned, or otherwise restricted, no matter what name they use, they should have the right to be informed that it's happening, the right to a specific explanation of the reason why, and the right to a timely appeal. In addition, all users over the age of 18 should have the right to opt out of content moderation and curation entirely and receive an unmanipulated stream of information if they so choose. The fight for free speech is a matter of victory or death for America and for the survival of Western civilization itself. When I am president, this whole rotten system of censorship and information control will be ripped out of the system at large. There won't be anything left. By restoring free speech, we'll begin to reclaim our democracy and save our nation. Thank you, and God bless America.
So, Donald Trump in absolute full flow there. Now, of course, the main thrust of that is targeting the left wing and the left wing censorship. But it is extraordinarily relevant to certainly our community, because we've often reported, James, how many outlets have been shadow banned, had their pages throttled, as it's called, which means literally the traffic restricted to views. So there are so many Sikh organisations whose websites and whose accounts on social media, whether it's Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, they've deliberately, clearly been shadow banned, as indeed we have been on YouTube. We've noticed this. All these things, Donald Trump is now, after his inauguration in January, he's going to launch this massive offensive, this big initiative to uncover what actually has been going on. As I say, primarily looking at the left-wing censorship and relevant primarily to elections. But this is going to have a massive impact because potentially it could reveal exactly India's influence. And of course, we often report that big tech, the likes of Google, Facebook, Meta, and these other giants, Amazon, they are infiltrated by RSS agents. We do know that there are a lot of people from the Indian diaspora who work in very significant and influential positions in big tech in Silicon Valley. That's one of his big targets. That's one of Trump's big targets. So as he peels back the layers, it's going to be interesting to see what he will uncover. And it's quite likely that I'm sure he will uncover a lot of this shadow banning, this throttling, this deliberate anti-Sikh activity that India has been doing through its own agents, its own RSS agents in Silicon Valley. So, James, I think there are interesting times ahead, clearly.
Absolutely, but at the same time, I do think that there is a side to be argued in terms of ensuring that the censorship is not in place, but at the same time, you're not opening it up with the floodgates wide open for hate, for inciting violence, for any type of targeted attacks on groups of people or individuals. So I think that there's a delicate balance there, but absolutely, I think it's great to restore the right of journalists to be able to report the stories that matter to the people who are really looking for that information.
Yeah, and I think you're right there, and I think you're right to point out that there is this line where there is free speech, and across that line goes into criminality or inciting violence or targeting through hate crime. But the good thing there is that there are very powerful laws which do exist that do operate and police that line. So freedom of speech is one of the most fundamental tenets of democracy, and this is definitely a move in the right direction. But as you rightly say, James, it's imperative that at the same time it is policed very carefully and that people are made aware and educated that there is a line that you do not cross. But this is a line also that India really likes to exploit or at least deliberately ignore, where they hate this actual concept of free speech, particularly when it comes to political dissenters, because of course here in the West it is perfectly legal and actually actively encouraged for political dissent, for people to stand up and hold governments to account and criticise governments. And that's how Western democracies have thrived for so long, because governments are always held to account. So if they go out of line, they are then brought down, and rightly so. So, okay, I've got a lot of stories to get through today, so I'm going to move on from that. But as I say, I think that's a pretty positive and hopefully good news story to start the day off with. Now, I'm going to move on to the UK government next. And there's been a lot going on the Jaggi side, a little update on the Jaggi side. Now, back in the Punjab, unsurprisingly, the news out of the Punjab is that Jaggi had his 138th trial hearing on the 6th of November. That was last week. And once again, the latest Baga Purana in Moga, Punjab court hearing for cases against Jaggi was immediately adjourned without proceedings. It has been delayed until the 13th of November. So of 25 official hearings this year, only 4 of them have seen any actual progress in the trial. So yeah, we're up to the 139th trial hearing for poor Jaggi. So that's just to highlight the deliberate inaction on behalf of the Indian government. So on this side, Gurpreet, his brother, Gurpreet Singh Johal, has been very active. Of course, I interviewed him a few weeks ago, and he's been very active since then, as he has been before. He's been lobbying, as we know. He met with David Lammy, the British Foreign Secretary, about a week ago. And immediately after that, he then met with a series of Labour MPs. Of course, we have a new Labour government now in power, headed by Keir Starmer. and David Lammy, our new Foreign Secretary. And there is this renewed hope that this new government, after 14 years of inaction by the Conservative government, there is hope that the Labour government might actually produce some results, which the previous Conservative government were noticeable in lacking. And so after Gurpreet met David Lammy, which he claimed was a very positive meeting, he then met various Scottish Labour MPs who then agreed to write to Keir Starmer demanding action. And they did indeed write this letter. 16 Scottish MPs, British Scottish MPs, including the chairman of the Scottish Affairs Select Committee, they wrote a letter that said, Jagtar has had 7 years of his life cruelly stolen from him. We urge you to send a message about the priority that your government places on protecting its citizens from abuse abroad. We ask you to make securing Jagtar's release a priority and ensure your government does whatever it takes to bring him home to his family. And after that, the Sikh Federation UK submitted a parliamentary e-petition last week titled Securing the Immediate Release and Return of Jagtar Singh Johal, expecting it to be approved and for it to go live this week, coinciding with the 7th anniversary, which is a week ago. This e-petition, this is a petition to the British Parliament, it said, it is widely accepted that British national Jagtar Singh Johal was tortured to sign a blank confession, has no chance of a fair trial, and arbitrarily detained without conviction in an Indian jail for more than 7 years. The UK government must secure Jagtar's immediate release and return to the UK. Keir Starmer, David Lammy accept Jagtar was arrested on the 4th of November 2017 after travelling for his wedding. He was tortured by Indian police. He was targeted because of his political activism, and an expert UN panel concluded in May 2022 that he has been tortured, denied the right to a fair trial, and he should be immediately released as there is no legal basis for his continued detention. Now, the way these petitions work is that if they get 10,000 signatures, then it is obliged by by the British government, beg your pardon, the British government is obliged to respond in writing to that petition. If 100,000 signatures are achieved, then the British government, the British Parliament is obliged to hold a debate to actually discuss the topic within the Houses of Parliament. So in other words, it has to be raised by the British government publicly and debated, and a conclusion to that debate has to be reached. Now, interestingly, this e-petition, this is where it starts getting sinister again. This e-petition was pushed last week. It was submitted last week, but the Sikh Federation was shocked when the parliamentary petition team rejected the petition by arguing it calls for an action relating to a particular individual or organisation outside of the UK, for which the UK government or Parliament are not responsible. Okay, so the Sikh Federation went back, they pushed back and successfully argued that Jagtar Singh Johal is a British national in arbitrary detention in an Indian jail, for which the UK government and Parliament are responsible. So the petitions team pushed back themselves again, and they said, no, it will reject it under what they quote as our individual case ruling, stating, I'm sorry, we can't accept petitions which call for actions with regard to named individuals, even if they are something that the government could be responsible for. So they have made a special case. They have this arbitrary right to reject a petition if they, on what they call an individual case ruling, think, no, we're just not going to. They don't have to justify why, they can just reject it. So the Sikh Federation went back to the petitions team yesterday, giving them half a dozen examples of petitions approved relating to individuals, and also said if the individual case rule has been recently introduced, we could introduce a more generic e-petition titled Securing the Immediate Release and Return of British Nationals Arbitrarily Detained in Indian Jails. We have not heard back from the petitions team, but we made them aware that Jagtar's MP raised questions earlier. So, and I'm just going to play you what's actually happened. First of all, I'm going to play you a couple of quick videos. The first one is Gurpreet after his meeting with David Lammy and the MPs.
Today marks 7 years when Jagtar's wife called to say Jagtar had been taken. Every year it gets more and more difficult. I look at Jagtar's wife and I recall the call that I had. It's been difficult. It has a toll on the family. It's been difficult on each stage to explaining to the family why Jagtar is not back. The cases in India take weeks upon weeks, delays upon delays. Each hearing, Jagtar's wife is looking and thinking positive. Most recently, we've had the bails dismissed, which both Jagtar and Jagtar's wife's hopes were destroyed within that bail decision. We still fight, because if we don't fight, we won't be able to get Jagtar back home. So it's been a difficult last 7 years. What's made it easier is the constant support we've had from the community, NGOs like Reprieve, Redress, and the support from individuals, human rights lawyers, that's kept us going for these years. So we'll continue to fight, because if we don't, this government or previous governments haven't done anything, so the pressure needs to remain in order to bring Jagtar back home. Your support is appreciated, and it's what carries me through every single day. So thank you for the continued support, and please, we will bring back Jagtar together.
So well done, Gurpreet. He's still battling, he's still fighting on a daily basis to bring his brother home. And of course, he's met with David Lammy and then the MPs subsequently, and who have then written a letter. And I'm pleased to report that last week in Prime Minister's Questions, this happened.
Douglas McAllister! Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Monday of this week marked the 7-year anniversary of my constituent Jagtar Singh Johal's arbitrary detention in India. Can the Prime Minister assure me that he and his government will do all they can to secure his immediate release and bring him home?
Yes, we're absolutely committed to pushing the Government of India on this really important case. And the Foreign Secretary has raised it and will continue to do so, and we'll make sure that we speak to him as we do.
Okay, fine. Great. It all sounds very positive. And yet, we have this petition from the Sikh Federation demanding a parliamentary debate being rejected twice now with increasingly risible excuses. So once again, it's highlighting this fact that even if Keir Starmer's government do actually genuinely want to take action against India about this and keep raising it, and I'm cynically raising an eyebrow if they actually have the political will to do that, clearly the British establishment is pushing back. They're fighting against it every step of the way. So Gurpreet, backed by the Sikh Federation, are pushing. This petition's been launched, and yet it cannot even get onto the petition books. I mean, you can have petitions literally about anything, about that this country demands we all wear pink bow ties on a daily basis. That petition would likely be launched. Yet, something as significant as this is getting excuses, really risible excuses from the establishment once again. They don't want this petition on the books. Why not? One has to question, why not? Again, it's highlighting what is the British establishment hiding? What are they up to? Why are they trying to stop this momentum from gathering once again to free Jagtar Singh Johal? Again, it's all very deeply suspicious. I still remain cynical about this British Labour government. I think Gurpreet, the Sikh Federation are all very positive. Absolutely, they have to be. They have to remain positive and buoyant and hopeful and optimistic that Keir Starmer's government will actually produce some results. I remain cynical about their political motivation. I think they care more about trade deals, etc., but time will tell. But more importantly, I believe the British establishment is fighting absolutely tooth and nail, hand in hand, in alignment with the Indian establishment, not to release Jagtar Singh Johal. Why is the big question? I don't know. But again, all the evidence always keeps coming up over and over again. The evidence keeps pointing to the fact that the British establishment does not want Jaggi released. The British establishment is still working in collaboration with the Indian establishment. Why, James? I have absolutely no idea. But full marks, my hat is tipped to Gurpreet and the Sikh Federation, who are fighting on a daily basis. Keep up that momentum. Things at least are happening. There is pressure mounting on the government to produce results. Even his own MPs now, 16 MPs have written to Keir Starmer saying you've got to produce results now. We need to see action. So hopefully, James, maybe, I will be proved wrong, maybe that we potentially will see Jaggi being released in the foreseeable future. We can keep our fingers crossed.
Absolutely, Angus, and it's the responsibility of every nation. That's why they have foreign affairs departments. One of the many responsibilities is to take care of their citizens who are over in foreign lands. And plain and simple, the UK government can learn from Canada's history when it came to the protections of Kader, who was actually a proven terrorist, and the government of Canada still got sued for $10.5 million. Well, that was the settlement that he got, even though he was guilty, because the Canadian government failed in their obligations to protect his rights from abuse and torture in Guantanamo Bay. That cost all Canadians, but it was also just very clearly demonstrates the responsibility of a nation to protect their citizens, good, bad, or otherwise.
Indeed. Okay, I'm going to wrap up. Still a lot to get through. We're running out of time. I'm going to move on to my next story now, which is the Australian government. And the Australian government have actually finally been a little bit more public. I've often said that the Five Eyes there's been a bit of a two-tier reaction to India's behaviour. And of course, in the vanguard has always been Canada and the US, taking very much the lead in Canada. Justin Trudeau being extremely vocal and courageous, I have to say, about the whole transnational repression activities of India. The UK has been a little bit subdued and has been reluctantly dragged along in support of both North American nations. And Australia and New Zealand have been a little bit subdued, a little bit quiet and a little bit, well, I wouldn't even say diplomatic. They just basically said very little, even when under pressure. Well, I'm delighted to say that Australia's foreign minister actually was finally seen publicly making statements about transnational repression. And the Australian Foreign Minister said a few days ago that she raised these allegations with her Indian counterpart that India has targeted Sikh activists in Canada. So this is Miss Penny Wong, who's Australia's Foreign Minister. She discussed these allegations of Canada with the Indian Foreign Minister, Jaishankar, who was actually visiting the Australian capital, Canberra, last week. And she said that her message to the Sikh community was that people have a right to be safe and respected in Australia, regardless of who they are. And she said, we've made clear our concerns about the allegations under investigation. We've said that we respect Canada's judicial process. She said this at a news conference side by side with Jaishankar. So she said this in front of Jaishankar. We convey our views to India, as you would expect us to do, and we have a principled position in relation to matters such as the rule of law and the independence of the judiciary, and also, frankly, the sovereignty of all countries. Jaishankar said Canada has put Indian diplomats under surveillance, which was unacceptable. And of course, Australia has close intelligence sharing ties with Canada as members of the Five Eyes alliance that also includes the US, Britain and New Zealand. So you can imagine that Mr. Jaishankar, India's Foreign Secretary, or Foreign Minister, beg your pardon, who was sitting side by side with Penny Wong in this press conference. Penny Wong is sitting there basically raising all these very uncomfortable truths, and Mr. Jaishankar must have been squirming in his seat, put in a slightly embarrassing position by his boss, Narendra Modi, that he's had to sit there next to Penny Wong, who's sitting there saying, well, look, we respect the rule of law. We actually take very seriously Canada's allegations and accusations against India. And again, this reference to sovereign soil. In other words, India has been murdering citizens on foreign soil, particularly Canada's foreign soil. We all know what India has been up to, even on Australian soil. We've had these false flag graffiti attacks on mandirs, where basically Hindutva activists have been deliberately defacing and graffitiing mandirs, Hindu temples in Australia, trying to smear and blame the Sikh community. They've been caught by the Australian police basically doing this. So again, Hindutva have been caught out. So even I think the Australian government are fully aware of what Hindutva and the RSS have been up to in Australia, James. So it's very nice at last to see that the Australian government are now publicly standing shoulder to shoulder with Canada, and they are raising this very issue, and in fact in front of the Indian Foreign Minister Jaishankar in a press conference. So I think slightly embarrassing for India once again there, James.
Absolutely, Angus, and I bet you that every muscle in his body tensed up tight. If you would have put a piece of coal up his butt before that statement, he would have shit you out a diamond afterwards.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, let's move on now to our comment section. We've got a lot of comments, a load of comments poured in over the last few days. And I've deliberately, for today's comments, focused primarily on a lot of critical and negative and attacking comments, and comments actually questioning a lot of the narratives that we've been pushing. We as we often say, James, we're not afraid of free speech. We support free speech. We totally respect and invite the narrative from the other side. We invite argument, debate. We always invite contradictory opinions. We love them. We love to debate them. That's what freedom of speech is all about. So I dedicate a lot of our comment section today to many of our critics and our counter-narrative spokespeople. Welcome to the channel and thank you for your comment. Now, last week I had a fascinating interview with Dr. Gurinder Singh Grewal. And Dr. Grewal talked at length about the facts about Khalistan, why Khalistan would be a success, the justification for it, why it can stand and thrive as an independent sovereign nation. And of course, this attracted hundreds of comments, mostly positive comments. But of course, we had a lot of people who are clearly wading in from the Indian side, really trying to tear into it and criticise and disagree with many of the comments. And Samip 3124, the first comment, came up with, nice funny propaganda channel. Thank you very much, absolutely. And Franziwell, who actually has made the same comment in the past, he, likewise, I say he, I don't know, maybe a lady, but Franziwell also came in and said, Khalistani propaganda channel. Well, Mahesh Bra responded, and I really couldn't respond any better than say, yes, like you have Hindutva channels and Christian channels, so... Absolutely. So to those of you, many of you who said this is a Khalistani propaganda channel, well, yeah, it is. And I think I've said before, if you go into a shoe shop, you can't shout out, oh my God, shoes. Yeah, we're selling the Khalistani perspective. That's what we're here for, James. If you don't like it, you don't have to watch. But please do keep watching and keep criticising. We love it. Do we not, James?
Absolutely, and you can't turn on Martha Stewart and be surprised that she's teaching you how to decorate a jail cell for 5 cigarettes or less. I mean, come on now.
Ooh, controversial. And Noise Within comes out with a comment. Sikhism is compromised. Easily throw money and they'll say anything. It's a new low. No, unfortunately, Sikhism is not compromised, Noise Within. This is what Sikhism is all about. The whole Khalistan movement is based on Sikhism. And when you say throwing money, they'll speak anything, I'm assuming you're sort of referring to James and myself being paid to spout Khalistani propaganda. Well, actually, if we didn't believe in it, we wouldn't be sitting here. It comes down to simple philosophy, ethics, morality, passion, belief, whatever you want to call it, is that James and I are thoroughly and utterly behind the Khalistan movement because as advocates of free speech, as advocates of democracy and advocates of the rule of law, we totally understand and align and support the whole philosophy of Khalistan. It's not about money. And believe me, we're really not being paid that much. Trust us, we're a small channel that's funded just about to survive. Yet we do it out of conviction and passion. We believe in what we're saying. So, and I think this comment that Sikhism is compromised, it is absolutely, the only way it's being compromised is by the RSS. And that is what we highlight, do we not, James? That the RSS has been working very hard to compromise, to undermine Sikhism by infiltrating the Gurdwaras and all the establishments. That's where the compromising is coming from, is it not, James?
Absolutely. And we look at it from a well-balanced and truthful perspective and try to share that. We agree with human rights should be respected everywhere in the world, especially by democratic societies. So yeah, we speak our truth and you know, some people may disagree with it, but they're welcome to do that because we respect their opinion as much as we would like them to respect ours.
Yeah, and I do hope, Noise Within, we've interpreted your comment correctly. I'm assuming it's a criticism. It actually could be seen the other way. If it was the other way, then my apologies, but I believe that was the criticism that was being raised. Alamjit Grewal says, 48% of Hindus, 100% scheduled caste, more than 70% Sikhs have no interest in this project Khalistan. Slightly, I'm not totally sure what you mean by this, other than the key point I think you pointed to is that the Khalistan movement does not have the support within the Punjab itself. Well, my answer to that is the same answer from the whole Sikh community and the Khalistan movement itself. If I may presumptuously assume what the response will be is, well, hold a referendum. If you're so strong in your belief that the support is not there in the Punjab, then hold a referendum and prove it. This is the reality, is that the reason why Narendra Modi won't hold a referendum is that they know full well that the Khalistan movement is massively supported in the Punjab. Otherwise, they would hold a referendum. They're not doing it because they know what the answer will be. And the proof, the evidence, is the fact that in the last election, 2 members of the Lok Sabha were elected in the Punjab by a massive, massive majority on a pro-Khalistan ticket. And Amrit Pal Singh, one of them, is actually residing in jail for his support of Khalistan. So in reality, Alamjit Grewal, I hate to say it, but the reality is that clearly there is the support for the Khalistan movement in the Punjab. And as many commenters have said, it's likely that across India there will be other people who would support the whole concept of Khalistan because of everything that it represents, James. I think that the truth is, if you genuinely believed that there wasn't support for Khalistan in Punjab, you'd hold a referendum and kill it once and for all.
I wholeheartedly agree. And it's more about the right to have your opinion and share your voice through a vote than it is whether you agree or disagree. It's about having that right to place the vote, Angus.
Yeah, and the next comment, Cow Stub Garg actually ups the ante here and actually says, look, I grew up in the Punjab and Punjabis that I know would lay waste to anyone trying to collect Khalistan. So what this person's saying is absolutely not. You know, everybody I know in the Punjab would fight tooth and nail to stop Khalistan happening. Okay, I totally respect that idea. It could well be that everybody you do know in the Punjab doesn't support Khalistan and would hate the idea of it. But again, it comes back to the whole democratic argument. If you genuinely believe that, then actually support a referendum. If you believe that the most of Punjab are against Khalistan, then support the whole idea of a referendum, because it would kill the Khalistan movement dead. It would stop it in its tracks. If you believe that strongly that Punjab would reject the concept of Khalistan, then you can kill it. Within 6 months, this whole Khalistan movement would disappear. If you hold the referendum and the Khalistan movement lost it, they would disappear. It's as simple as that. So why won't you hold the referendum? Again, because the evidence actually flies in the face of your belief in the Punjab. It may well be the case, James, that there are Punjabis who are deeply against it. I'm sure there will be many Punjabis who are against the idea of it. But it would be evident that there is a very powerful pro-Khalistan movement in the Punjab. It can only be settled through democratic means, and that is a referendum.
Excuse me. Absolutely. I totally agree, Angus.
Alamjit also comes back with this comment that Khalistan wouldn't be any better than Pakistan or Afghanistan. Look at Bangladesh. It couldn't survive without the help of India. Khalistan will end up as a theocracy worse than Iran and Afghanistan. No, actually, I would fundamentally disagree with this, and I think the evidence points to the fact that this is wrong. Primarily because you're saying it wouldn't be any better than Pakistan or Afghanistan. Well, actually, it would be run completely on completely different economic and theological grounds. And one only needs to look at the basis of Sikhi to acknowledge this. Firstly, you need to look at the statistics, is that the Sikhs have been statistically proven to be one of the most successful communities within India as it stands. They are entrepreneurial, they are commercially astute, so therefore anything that they control, they have full control of, tends to be a commercial success. So from a simple commercial basis, it will be a success, and a better commercial success than, as you rightly say, Pakistan or Afghanistan. You say that Bangladesh can't survive without the help of India. Khalistan will stand on its own 2 legs commercially and on every other basis, but it will also have the support, probably, of the West. It will have the support of the United States, a massive financial support, no doubt. So if it needs support, and it certainly will in the early days, it will likely come from the Western democratic nations that Pakistan and Afghanistan do have to a small extent, but there's a bigger, should we call it, skin in the game for the US with Khalistan. So it would actually financially be supported, even if it did need financial support. And you say it will end up as a theocracy worse than Iran and Afghanistan. Now, Iran and Afghanistan are both run as Islamic theocracies. And I don't like to, draw comparisons, but I would certainly say that the Sikh philosophy is geared up to, firstly, the way that the modern world operates, but also look at the Sikh Empire. It was a massive success. It wasn't run as a theocracy. It was run as a nation that happened to be ruled by Sikh, but ultimately every other faith was treated as equals. And this was a fundamental tenet of the Sikh Empire, is that every other religion, race, creed, or whatever, were treated as equals. That is not the case in theocracies like Iran and Afghanistan, which are run as fundamental Islamic nations. It's a very different a different comparison. So unfortunately, the evidence would point completely to the contrary of this, is that Khalistan would not be run as a theocracy. Ultimately, it would be run as every religion is treated as an equal. It's a very different basis, and you only need to look at the Sikh Empire to contradict that, James.
That's right, Angus.
Mohammed Mir says Haryana and Himachal is part of East Punjab, and keep your arguments towards that part. I'm not entirely sure what you mean, other than that, originally Haryana and Himachal Pradesh were parts of the original Punjab in the old days. And then we start moving into this argument. There's a few comments relating to Punjab across the border. And of course, this all relates to pre-partition days, when the Punjab included what is a large part of northeastern Pakistan now, the Pakistan Punjab. Sharad says Pakistan Muslims from Punjab evicted Sikhs to India. India gave them refuge in Delhi, but Canadian Khalistanis want only 40% of Punjab and neglect Pakistani Punjab. So again, this comes back to the old argument. Well, look, if you want Khalistan, why are you only targeting the Indian part of Punjab? Why not the Pakistan part of Punjab? And it's a very good question, and actually, I think it's a very valid argument. Why is Khalistan not arguing that the Pakistan Punjab should be part of Khalistan? Well, I think there are many reasons behind that, and I've asked this question to many guests, and I think it really comes back down to, look, let's walk before we can run. Is that we should, at the moment, the main Sikh Khalistan movement is based in the Indian Punjab. It is to a lesser extent in the Pakistan side of Punjab, where Urdu is the main language. Is that Islam is the main religion in Eastern Punjab, well, I'd say Pakistan Punjab. And that's probably why that Khalistan at this stage will likely only be the Indian part of the Punjab. That is not to say that one day in the far future that Pakistan Punjab may want to become part of Khalistan. Who knows? But it's a very complex situation. There are no simple, clear answers to this. And it always comes down to what will be the geographical definition of Khalistan. There is no clear answer at this stage. It will come down to the final negotiations, what will form part of Khalistan. As a rule of thumb, at the moment, it's aligning with the existing Punjab, but there are arguments to say, why shouldn't it include neighbouring provinces like Haryana or Himachal Pradesh, etc.? Why shouldn't it include Pakistan Punjab, etc., etc.? Who knows? Time will tell, and it will only come down to the discussions at that given moment.
Well, and I think another important point there, Angus, I think an important point too is to remember the promises made by India to the Sikh community back at the partition times of 1947, and those broken promises that really were fundamental in Punjab and for the Sikh community having their autonomy.
Indeed, yeah, absolutely. And Tahir Dutch just develops the argument to a bit more of a sort of a philosophical level, and says, look, he agrees with Dr. Grewal. We Pakistani Punjabis want to put things straight with Sikh both sides. Historically, we've both made mistakes. Others have taken advantage of our differences. But there is still a lot of room for Punjabi unity. And this, I think this comment just elevates above the silly partisan politics going on. So look, at the end of the day, the Punjab used to be united. We're all the same people. It's people playing political games, taking advantage of our differences and trying to divide us and put wedges between us all. Basically, it all boils back down to, why can't we all just live side by side peacefully, which I think is a much more important comment on that. And Rupinder Brar says, Angus hasn't asked the two obvious questions in this softball interview based on partition. How will the 40% of Hindus of Punjab reconcile with Khalistan? Yeah, actually a good point. And I think I have actually raised this same question in the past with other past guests. And I think the answer is, look, it comes down to simple democracy again, is if those 40% of Hindus don't agree with the whole concept of Khalistan, if there is a referendum, vote against it. If the vote goes pro-Khalistan and Khalistan comes into existence, then they have a choice. They can either stay in the Punjab and live under the new Khalistan sovereignty, or they can relocate to India. And India wants to become a Hindu Rashtra. The RSS are driving for a Hindu Rashtra. So you would find a very welcome home in India. Ultimately, it is believed that many Hindus will want to move to Khalistan because of what Khalistan represents. But ultimately, it's just the sad reality of life, is that if you're a Hindu living in Punjab, you don't like it, vote against it. If you're on the losing side of that vote, then you have a choice. You can stay or move. Unfortunately, that's how democracy works. And it's the same if Quebec had gone independent in Canada, if Scotland had gone independent in the United Kingdom, the people there have a choice. You either live with it if it goes against you, or you move away. That's the reality of it. Your second comment, what will happen to Sikhs living in the rest of India? Likewise, absolutely. They likewise have a choice. They can move to Khalistan when it comes into existence, or they can remain living in India. It's as simple as that. It's all about choice. Democracy is all about choice. It is about freedom of choice. That's ultimately what it comes down to, James.
Absolutely, and I think that there would be a much more peaceful living for both sides if the referendum was to be held one way or the other. I think it would bring peace to a lot of regions.
Indeed, it will. And there's so much we could talk about that comment, but unfortunately we don't have time. But thank you for that comment, Rupinder. It was very considered questions. Angus says he's a keen student of geography and economics, and he retired as a lecturer from Indian Punjab. And this person has a few reservations on the issue. We talked a lot about, so one of the questions I asked Dr. Grewal was, as a landlocked country, doesn't it mean that Khalistan will be vulnerable to its neighbours? It will be pretty much reliant on its neighbours to get access to the Indian Ocean for trade and logistics. A landlocked country is always at the mercy of neighbouring countries. The Punjab is mainly an agricultural state with depleting water levels, virtually no natural resources. Thirdly, we Sikhs have always lacked sincere leadership. Corruption's always on the increase. Khalistan will always be a losing proposition. By the way, I'm a Jat Sikh, currently living in California. Well, thank you for your comment, and I think you raised some very important points here. Yeah, I think, yes, you're right. Landlocked countries will always be at the mercy of neighbouring countries. But it doesn't mean it's not a deal breaker, that ultimately many landlocked countries always do find ways. And actually, Dr. Grewal referred to several landlocked countries. Switzerland is a prime example. Switzerland is a small landlocked country, as is Luxembourg, as is Liechtenstein, all these small landlocked countries, but yet they thrive because they found ways to import goods and services, whatever it is that they need. And there's no reason that Khalistan couldn't do exactly the same. It will be reliant on either Pakistan or India, and it intends to have amicable relations with both sides. So I don't think that in itself is a deal breaker. And of course, there is air travel. It can bring in stuff by air. That is not a deal breaker. Depleting water levels, yeah, it is, but it has 5 major rivers. It has riparian rights, and under international law, there is nothing that China can do to prevent that water or the northern states from India flowing into the Punjab. If they tried to stop that water flowing into Khalistan, there would be an almighty international outcry. You just cannot do that. It is not allowed under international law. Those nations would find the opprobrium, in other words, the anger of the international community. They just wouldn't be allowed to do that. But of course, water is an issue. And one of the criticisms about Indian rule is their mismanagement of that water during the monsoon season and the dams, etc., is that they're suffering floods and drought because of this simple, basic mismanagement by India. And they cannot control the water as best they could. And the argument is that Khalistan, once they get control of the water, they then can manage it better through both the monsoon season and the dry seasons. And then No natural resources. Yeah, you're right, but it does have a massive resource that it maximises. It is the breadbasket of India. It supplies India with enormous amounts of grain and harvest. That will not change. And certainly when it can manage its own water resources, is that it will be able to manage its agriculture. That will be its main export. It's a simple fact. And thirdly, Sikhs have lacked sincere leadership. I totally agree with that. I think there has been a weakening of leadership. We reported on this. And I think that unification will change that. I think the Sikh community is getting its act together. I think this is changing, etc., etc. And Khalistan will always be a losing proposition. Yeah, that is your opinion. I think I would disagree with that for many reasons that we talked about. But I totally respect your view, and I think many people would agree with you. Many people would disagree with you. But I would say to your comment, absolutely, I think that is a very sensible, considered, intelligent comment. I hope we've answered it sufficiently, James.
Absolutely. I think that there's a lot of economic benefit for India to have an independent Punjab as well, especially looking at transfer and transport. And there's just so many different benefits to both sides, I think, Angus.
Yeah, we must rush on because we're so over time. And here we go, Ashley Kandar once again. Now, Ashley Kandar has been very active in our pages across many of our recent stories, wading in, not afraid to wade in and debate the issues. So well done for you for debating the issues. And Ashley's saying that if I become a comedian, that he'll pay any amount of money to come and see my show. Right, you're on. I will let you know when James and I set up our double act, touring the world. Our first show will be in Khalistan, James. And Ashley Kandar, you will be invited into. I'll guarantee you a front row seat.
Absolutely. And bring friends, because I've been doing comedy for over 30 years and I still can't sell out the venues.
Absolutely. So thank you, Ashley, for your involvement in our pages. There's been a lot of comments, and you're certainly not afraid to stand up and debate your corner. So thank you for that. And Mr. Coolwinder, solid fake information. Well, I hate to say it, but I don't think it is fake. We always try and corroborate everything that we produce. I'm afraid the only fake information, we know where that's coming from and where that's broadcast, and we exist to try and actually counteract that and point the fact that what you're probably seeing on a daily basis is actually the fake information, James. It's all misinformation that the Indian media are pouring out.
Absolutely. And as I said, there's just such a saturation right now from the India media and the RSS. So I can understand why they are misinformed or mistaken on that.
And Anil Mehta comes in claiming that we are two ill-informed clowns. Well, we should be touring the comedy circuit, James, because clearly we're building a fan base who appreciate our humour. I'm not so sure about the ill-informed. I think we do our best. Hopefully we're at least slightly informed. Now, this is where it gets important. We need to spend time looking at our own countries rather than sitting on some sort of high ground judging other. Now, I will take you to task with this comment, Anil Mehta, because on a daily basis in almost every one of our shows, it is very likely you will hear, particularly myself, criticising the British government, most of the Western governments for inaction or whatever. I am the very first person to stand up and call out American hypocrisy, US hypocrisy, extrajudicial killings, whatever it happens to be. Absolutely, we do not condone any of that. We will call it out, anything that flies in the face of freedom, democracy, the rule of law, etc. And yes, we regularly point out where our own governments fail on that. We will call it out, we hold our governments to account. That is what living in a democracy is all about. It's holding our own governments to account. I am not afraid of shouting about the failures of the British government. I regularly call out the US government for its failures. I don't think I've called out the Canadian government yet, maybe the odd minister, James, but certainly we are not judging from a moral high ground. Well, actually, we're judging from a high ground of, I would say, ethics and rule of law and democracy. That's the ground that we're shouting from. I wouldn't call it a high ground, other than that we're calling out misinformation and the failures of governments, whether it's Indian or Western governments, James.
Absolutely. And we've spoken about Canadian politicians being in the back pocket of certain foreign interference groups and whatnot. So, absolutely. Maybe you need more of that, but at the same time, we want to focus on the truth, on the reality, and countering the current narrative. So that's where we're at.
Indeed. And please, Anil Mehta, if you think that our own governments are being hypocritical, show us the evidence and I'll be delighted to agree with you because, as I say, I do it on a regular basis. So join in the debate. You show where the Western democracies from their so-called high ground are being hypocritical and we will support you in those very comments. I do that and I will call out your comments and I will talk about them accordingly and I'll probably agree with them. Right, Jaspal Chatterfeld. India is run by politicians and 30% of them have criminal records. The majority of BJP gets elected by creating hate. Nothing good can come out of this type of government. I wonder what their IQs are of these politicians. Totally agree with you on this, James. I think we've often talked about the criminality of the Indian government. It goes all the way up to the very top, clearly.
Well, and if they had high IQs, they'd be smart enough to stay out of politics, Angus.
Indeed, absolutely. Now, Hardar Singh says, it'd be appreciated if I interviewed Mr. Swaranjit Singh Khalsa. Well, actually, all I would point you to is look at our channel and you will find an interview I did with Swaranjit about, it must be 6 months ago, 8 months ago. Certainly early this year, I interviewed Swaranjit. We had a fascinating interview. And please look through the channel. You will find an interview. And I've had the odd discussion with Swaranjit since then. He's passed various bits of information on since then. But maybe it's time that I did another interview with Swaranjit. Good idea. Thank you for the comment. But do have a look back through our channel and you will find that interview. Right. Kormal says, I wish you could understand Hindi and hear the media. They're only reporting Sikh issues, nothing else on their newsfeed. James, yeah, we talked about this. The Indian media is absolutely swarming with anti-Sikh propaganda. They are desperate, are they not?
Oh, we've covered this and I've said it over and over today, Angus.
Absolutely. I mean, what more can we say about that? You're absolutely right. And I wish we did speak Hindi and Punjabi because there's an awful lot more we could report. But I would refer you to our Punjabi speaking side of the channel. They do report a lot on these sorts of things as well because, of course, they can see a lot of that media that's been spewed out by India. Hat B says, this is terrible. In Haryana, this is a few days ago. In Haryana, a young Sikh was picked up by a Hindu mob. His hands and feet were tied up. His hair was forcefully cut and he was dumped outside a Gurdwara, still tied up. This is what's happening in India every single day. And that sparked a long, long thread of discussion about that. And as somebody said, look, if this happens, get video evidence of it because it must be circulated around social media. It must go viral. Attacks like this because they keep happening, they keep getting buried. So get video evidence. If there's any video evidence of this, even the aftermath, get the evidence, circulate it across social media. This is the evidence that is so vital in winning the PR battle. We need to counteract the Hindutva army that is sending out videos on a daily basis and hatred on a daily basis across social media. It needs to be counteracted, and it can be counteracted by getting evidence of dreadful attacks like this, terrible anti-Sikh attacks like this that's been done by the Hindutva mobs. So please, if you can get hold of any evidence like this, make sure it's videoed, even the aftermath, anything that points to what happened, get it out there, get it across social media, highlight it to the main Sikh channels, and they will circulate evidence like this. Likewise, just tag us in as well. We'll take a look at it and we can circulate evidence like that. It's terrible, isn't it, James, this?
It's a horrible story, and I did notice that earlier and tried to find some footage, but I haven't yet found that.
Indeed. Mukhtar Singh refers to, I talked about this momentum gaining from the Congress Party about a potential apology for 1984 and the genocide. And I mentioned that maybe even Rahul Gandhi might be considering that whole idea. But Mukhtar says, look, where Rahul Gandhi is concerned, even if he did want to apologise, his hands are tied by the higher leadership of Congress. Yeah, I think actually you're probably right. I think there are the hidden hands of the Congress Party, those who are controlling the puppet strings, I think would say no chance that we will ever apologise for 1984. I think you're probably right. But I do wonder when I say that, it does cross my mind that maybe from a ruthless political perspective, there may be some in the Congress camp who might actually be saying, look, hang on a second, there's an awful lot of votes we could pick up here. If we want to beat the BJP, and they're getting closer now, they are now the official party of opposition, that they may say, look, it only takes a certain number of, a certain increase in our voting base and we can beat the BJP. They may suddenly say, look, do you realise, and they'll go through their political calculations, they may say, look, do you realise we can win X million votes from the Sikh community if we do a simple apology? Who knows? I don't know. I'm not a politician. But there may well be the few voices in those roundtable meetings where they're discussing strategy for the next election. Maybe there might be a few voices who may say, look, if we apologise, it might win X million votes from the Sikh community. We need those to win the next election. I don't know, James. Politics is a dirty game.
It is, Angus, but I mean, there were times where nobody ever expected the Canadian government to acknowledge and apologize for the Chinese head tax or the Indian residential schools and other things, and it's happened. So let's hope over time that that's a part of the healing process.
And the final comment, because we are so over time now, from Pam Singney. Angus and James, amazing programme. Always began watching by accident. It had the logo, the Satellite logo. Brilliant, well done, boys, from watching from Birmingham in the UK. So a big hello and a big shout out to the community up in the Midlands of the UK, up in Birmingham. Thank you for watching the show. Spread the word, tell more, tell all your friends that we exist. We'd love to increase our audience up there in the Midlands of the UK. So thank you for watching. Khalistan Zindabad. Only you're hooked now. Great stuff. I'm delighted. So thank you for joining us. And indeed, Khalistan Zindabad. But unfortunately, we must draw things to a close there, as we are so over time, as always. But thanks so much for all your comments. There's been so many wonderful comments. Unfortunately, time restricted us. We couldn't cover as many as we'd like to have done. But thank you for your comments. Thank you particularly for all those counter-narrative comments and the critical comments. Appreciate those. Do keep those coming in. Don't forget, you can, of course, message us directly at message@satellotv.com if there's anything you'd like to bring to our attention without putting it into the public domain. But in the meantime, thank you so much, as always, to our audience for watching. We do appreciate your being there and your support. But in the meantime, it's a goodbye from me and it's a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
We will see you next time. Thanks for watching Perspectives.